Friends, good afternoon for those of us who are here in Nairobi, and for those of us who are listening and watching this session from different parts of the world. Please welcome from wherever you are. My name is Kenneth Mbongi. I'm the chair of the host department of this program, which is the Department of History and Archaeology of the University of Nairobi here in Kenya. And we have our presenter today who is going to be introduced just in a bit. And it is now my pleasure and great honor to welcome the moderator and discussant of this session. He's a good friend of mine and is a brother to me, Mr. Tony Mochama. Tony Mochama is a journalist, works with the Nation Media Group. I'm sure those of you who are here and those watching, you know Tony. And also, more importantly, he is the Secretary General of PEN International, the Kenyan chapter. So without much ado, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to welcome Tony to carry on with the program. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ken Mbongi. I'll very quickly say, on this, I think this is the climatic day of the series you've run. So please allow me and join me in congratulating Dr. Mbongi for bringing this rather revolutionary program to the university that allows these hallowed academic towers to have the ivory fade a bit and engage with both the public, both here offline and our virtual public, because this is the way it is in 2024. There's no, the Ivory Tower is a very beautiful place, and now we are all in it, and it's wonderful because this is the new sort of intellectual, sort of and interdisciplinary engagements that we need, and intergenerational also. So thank you very much, Dr. Mbongi. Today we are going to have a very special, or rather we already have a very special guest. He's a man of multiple worlds. He spent his first 30 years in St. Petersburg in Russia. It was then the Soviet Union. He then made the transition across the Atlantic to America. And it wasn't just a physical transition. It was also a linguistic one, because with his very limited English back then, ile ya kujifundisha, Professor Mikhail, when you hear now is Professor Mikhail, taught himself, not just taught himself English, but taught himself English so well that he has eventually risen to the highest echelons of academia in teaching it. And he teaches it currently, he does his teaching practice of English and creative writing at Concordia University in Montreal. He's one of the most senior professors there. He's a tenured professor. He has written essays in the New Yorker and other magazines, and taught, I think, a lot of people. And also managed in Kenya to start programs like summer literary seminars and international literary seminars, which is where we have the first partners of people like Kwani and Binyavanga, who died 5 years ago, a week ago. So that's just in memoriam of Binyavanga. So without further ado, I'll get straight into today's topic, which is about crosswords. You're going to listen to a lot of things about crosswords, and both within literature and within our world, because we no longer live in just, northern, well, we do north and southern hemisphere, but the world, I'm not sure it's a global village, or now it's become global porridge. In Kisii, Dr. Mbongi would say Erongori, because sometimes it seems like a bit of a slash. These days, everything is all mixed up, and some even say messed up. So I'll start with a bit of city literature. We are right in the CBD, but I'm sure for all of you, both the youngsters, of whom some I can see here, and to some of my older friends, you'll notice that we no longer, our CBD, many years ago, I did this book called, about a decade ago, it was published a decade ago, launched, Nairobi, the Night Runner's Guide. And that place no longer exists. Yeah, we no longer have the CBD as the center of leisure, recreation. Yeah, when you're going home at night, it's quite dark. If you leave places like the Gute, the Alliance, if you transit across town, it's a very silent space. It wasn't always so. I'd done this book imagining that it would be the guide, that at the airport you could buy it. Then as a, especially foreign visitor, or even as a closeted person in the city, then you'd read it and know where to go. Places like Florida 1000, Madhouse for the more adventurous. Of course, these spaces do not exist at all anymore. What I've realized that I was actually doing, at the time I thought I was writing a living book, but I was actually doing, I thought I'm doing current cartography, but it turned out into a historical document. This is an archive. It's a nocturnal archive. It's a piece of nostalgia and sentimentalia. So I'll read very little because I do want Mikhail to take over and talk about another city called St. Petersburg. So this is just literally half a page because the first part of our talk will be on cities. The first interaction we'll have. Mm-hmm. So here we are. Inside, Hooters is full. This place is a mad football club on Kaunda Street. The unforgettable opening chapter of Hooters was when Senegal beat France with a single unforgettable goal. And after the game, back in 2000, we all raced into the, back in 2002, we all raced into the street, some of us as far as Mamangina, chanting Senegal, Senegal, and earning 9 seconds of fame on KTN that one can only get when running amongst an incorrigible throng in the middle of a football miracle. Today, as the English take on Paraguay, I can bet my last ruble the tutors will be full to the roof. Go, England, go? I don't think so. After Hooters, the night runner crosses over to the garden and pub restaurant at the Alliance Française building, sitting in those sculptured and designed grounds that are like a pale shadow of French Eden, the Parisian landscape version. The night runner thinks of the magic month when the European Film Festival is on at the auditorium. If you cross the road, you'll get to a club called Fridays. And next to it, the Secrets Lounge, formerly Chillers at the View Park Towers. This is not a bad place for a night runner to begin. The music is from a club era that is at least 10 years in the mists of time. It reminds one Kate of the Kimathi Street club called Visions, and she bemoans the end of the Dresswell Club, where revelers were privileged to sit on leather, the era that reminds the night runner of what a night buccaneer we all were. Lambada, Westlands, karaoke night. How many bad singers since the first shy Japanese schoolgirl with pretty eyes and a frog's croak of a voice sang into a token night and rocked her karaoke into broken microphones the world over. Okay, so Professor Mikhail, yes, my city, your city really, St. Petersburg. Thank you.
Okay. on? Okay. All right. Well, thank you for coming, and it's good to be here. This is not my first or the second or even the 20th time in Nairobi. I've been coming here for many years, for decades. And Tony and the department asked me to talk about cross boundaries and about the history of the place where I come from. I come from St. Petersburg, Soviet Union. I'm from Leningrad, Soviet Union, and none of those names, neither of those two names, exist on any up-to-date map of the world anymore. So there is no Soviet Union, there is no Leningrad, there is Russia, and there is St. Petersburg. Probably the only city in the world built according to, in the record short time. Built in record short time, 9 years, according to the plan that existed in the head of Peter the Great, Mad Tsar of Russia, built at the expense of hundreds of thousands of lives, laying in the foundation of the swamp that undergirds the city. And probably the largest open air museum in the world, designed to be the most beautiful city in the world. Tony has been there several times. And Peter the Great at that time invited the best architects from the Netherlands, from Italy, from all over the world to build the perfect European city. And he sort of wanted to shame Russians into Europeanness by telling them, as it were, see, this city is too good for you to live in. But this is the city where Europeans would live, and you're not Europeans. The history of Russia essentially is an attempt to catch up with the West, lagging behind by at least 250 years that the Mongols occupied Russia and essentially froze it. And due to its humongous size, Russia saturated itself with the invaders. But and the Mongols did not move further into Europe, stayed in Russia, but froze it completely for a couple of hundred years. So that's the very brief exegesis on St. Petersburg, Russia. An unlikely city, the largest city in the world, so close, by the only city in the world on the 70th parallel, which is to say very close to the Arctic Circle. It's fourth largest city in Europe. So that's about it about St. Petersburg, except that it's always been in competition with Moscow. And Moscow represents the ultimate quote unquote Russianness of the country's character, which is to say, it's not built according to the grid. It's all completely irregular streets, starting with one name, ending with another, looping up on itself, and so forth, where Russian people feel comfortable since 1,000 years ago. And Petersburg was all a grid, all a matrix. And Russian people rebelled against it. The history of Russian literature in many ways is the history of rebellion against foreignness of St. Petersburg. That's the leitmotif of the writings of Dostoevsky, of Pushkin, and so on. So, yeah. That's about St. Petersburg. If anybody has any questions about St. Petersburg, I'll be happy to answer those questions. What should I read? There is no city in this book. But yeah. Read something for 5 minutes? Yeah. It's not in this book. So let me say a few words then about transition from St. Petersburg to where I spent the first 30 years of my life, first to the United States and then to Canada, and from Russian to English. In Russia, in the Soviet Union, I was first electromagnetic engineer. Then I applied to immigrate from the Soviet Union and became enemy of the people, as it were, traitor to the motherland. And so I got a new job, which is to say to be a security guard at the roller coaster in the Leningrad Central Park of Culture and Leisure, the lowest common denominator of all jobs, where I waited to get the permission to immigrate. And when I did, it was under Gorbachev in 1968. In 1986, I came to the United States, and I at first was hoping to continue being a writer in Russian. Back in Leningrad, I was a member of an underground literary club called Club 81 of samizdat, so-called samizdat, self-publishing writers, representative of so-called second culture. In other words, apolitical writers, not approved by the government. And so when I came to the United States, I was hoping at first to continue writing in Russian, very quickly realized that you cannot really find readership in Russian in the United States. And I also was feeling sad and kind of heartbroken after leaving Russia, thinking that I had made the greatest mistake of my life and I could no longer go back, at least at that time. And so I started trying to write in English as a sort of like mechanical exercise to soothe myself, because whenever I tried to write in Russian, Russian immediately aided and abetted me in wallowing in self-pity and misery and depression. Russian is exceptionally good for those purposes. It's a very loosely structured language, and it's, if you want to indeed pity yourself, Russian will help you. And so, yeah. And so, but in English, I couldn't do any of that. In English, I could only be adequate to every given sentence. And so in English, I was just started writing very short sentences and stories in very short sentences, a sentence, a sentence, a sentence. And that's how the wall is built. And then another layer of bricks of sentences, sentence and sentence and sentence. And then, but you have to be adequate to every sentence. You have to be adequate to the storyline. You cannot go off on tangents. It's like walking through a dangerous terrain, step to the left, step to the right, and you're sunk. So it was a very difficult and gradual process, but eventually, after a couple of years, I started writing full-length stories in English, and they started getting published, and then a book of my stories got published, and then my new life in literature had begun. I'll read you a very, very short story from my last book of stories, called Life, How Was It? Someone I hadn't seen in 40 years recognized me the other afternoon at the Strand bookstore, the one in New York, largest used bookstore in New York, Strand bookstore. In middle and high school back in Leningrad, he had been one of my closest friends. He was buying a coffee table album of New York pictures, something along the lines of "To see New York and die" for his mother-in-law, he told me, winking. And I'd stop by on my way to a friend's house in the neighborhood. A burly, broad-shouldered, handsome man of vaguely Levantine aspect, a cross of sorts between Hitchcock and, oh well, those crosses and parallels tend to make nothing more vivid, a cross between Alfred Hitchcock and Angelina Jolie. How's that? He hailed me good-naturedly in Russian as I was passing by the cash register. M, is that you? Is Mishka already up north? That was an old running high school joke between us. Mishka up north had been one of the most popular brands of chocolate bar in the Soviet Union. Its wrapper pictured the dignified-looking polar bear strolling along a massive floe of Arctic ice. Mishka is the common, loving diminutive for any kind of bear in Russian, be it black or polar. Mishka, of course, is also the diminutive, highly irreverent and childlike form of Misha, which in itself is a diminutive of Mikhail, which is my name. For someone to be, quote, up north in the general Soviet parlance meant his having been arrested and sent off to one of the Gulag destinations for his political activities, or more likely and pertinently, the looseness of his lips, the pointless frivolity of his speeches. D, I exclaimed, not his real initials, but close enough. Already quite certain it was indeed him, recognizing him even despite my general propensity for recognizing those from my distant past whom I had never actually met before. Is that you? Strange meeting, but how did you know it was me? I can't believe, don't tell me I haven't changed beyond any, possibility of recognition since high school. Oh, you most definitely have, he assured me with a smile. It's just that I saw a picture of you in a newspaper back home, maybe 5 or 6 years ago. Plus, I'm on Facebook, technically speaking, although I hardly ever am there. It's true, though, there's very little in the face you have today from the one you used to have back then. Sorry if that sounds upsetting to you, maybe. Oh, no, I said, no, no. That's how I tend to think of myself in any event at present, being on my second, wholly separate life. It's like that old joke about the historical museum in Genoa having on exhibit two skulls that used to belong to Christopher Columbus. One is a child, the other is a grown man. In every joke, well, there is a kernel of joke, as the saying goes. He paid for the book for his mother-in-law, and we moved away from the cash register and started talking animatedly. Though he only had a few minutes, he was running back to his hotel to collect his wife and elder daughter to head to the airport at home. He told me the abbreviated story of his life. After 20 years of being a merchant marine and having circumnavigated the world many times over, he was now living in Yekaterinburg. It's a long story, he said in response to the puzzled look that I gave him. My wife's from there, her father, a mini oligarch of sorts, locally, and he offered to invest in the tour agency I was starting then, 15 years ago, if I relocated there, and so on. So I thought, well, why not? St. Petersburg, of course, is great, but Yekaterinburg has its certain advantages. It's a nice enough city, just very far away from everything, to be sure, but them's the break. You can't always want what you get, We reminisced. Some of the key episodes from our shared childhood and adolescence neither of us could recall, as though they'd never happened, or rather as though we'd never lived through those moments of our own lives. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, well, the point of the story is that the two people from two different lives, one of them inhabited two lives, the other one was left in the other one, and we, in the end, asked each other, knowing that we would never see each other, so how was it? And we understood each other. So, you mean life? Yeah, how was it for you? Interesting. I can't complain. Could have been worse. Life, how was it? Anyways, all right. Thank you for listening.
Okay. So thank you. And Misha, thank you very much. Yeah, we've gotten like a very deep flavor. I want you to enjoy Mikhail in four cores. He'll have to give us access to probably his book. So you're getting four different flavors. Today's a four-course menu over the next hour. So we'll move from meal. Dr. Fred, I know you like menus, except you keep putting cabbages on Facebook. Yeah. That I can see Dr. Fred Mbogo has joined us. So we'll just go within 15-minute spans so that you enjoy your full four course over the next hour. And I can see people are very interested, and we'll have an entire hour with Misha for question time. So this next bit is going to be about, the early 1980s. Yeah. And that was a strange time, both here and in the Soviet Union. the Soviet Union was transitioning from Brezhnev, from a bunch of leaders. I think there was, I call them the ABCs, Andropov, Brezhnev, and Chichenenko, into Gorbachev. And in Kenya, we were transitioning in the opposite way, sort of, because we were transitioning from Moi, mild Moi, to Moi, Moi after the coup. Yeah, you know, that's when things, I think, got crazy. We were just saying earlier, the Dr. Mbongi, about how people would even be arrested in the senior common room here, like Chemutai. Is it Chemutai? Keep Chelagat, yes. So, so as usual, for the crosswords of the world, I'll do something very briefly, and then Misha is going to give another sort of like 10 to 15 minutes of the Soviet situation. Yeah. Okay. So 1980 to 1982, and I'll just jump around. This will be about 3 minutes. 1980 probably gave mankind the most unforgettable, if you think in a global sense, songs of the past 4 decades. Starting with Casey and the Sunshine Band's Please Don't Go, Michael Jackson's Rock With You, his mentor Diana Ross's Upside Down, Blondie's Call Me, and another Bites the Dust by Queen. Moi's presidency only entered its troublesome 2s and 3s at about the same time. 1980 to 82 was dominated by increasingly open factional conflict among the new ruling team as Charles Njonjo, the Attorney General, quietly changed to Mwai Kibaki for the vice presidency. Conflict had broken out almost as soon as Moi took office, and tensions between the Kibaki technocrats and the Moi Njonjo team had even been evident in Central Province in the 1979 elections. Njonjo's supporters warned that Kibaki had too much power, combining the positions of vice president and minister of finance. They blamed him for the deteriorating economic situation in Kenya. Kibaki, whose interest lay more in economics than in the dark cloak and daggers of Kanu politics, looked increasingly endangered in his positions. In 1980, Njonjo, having reached the retirement age of 64, civil servants took the plunge into electoral politics. Let me jump. The growing tensions between the two Kikuyu rival factions with the third group, the Kenyatta-era leaders on the sidelines, enabled President Moi to make effective use of his soon-to-be well-polished divide-and-rule tactics to enhance his own authority. Gradually, Kikuyus were retired from the civil service. They were also replaced as government appointees to parastatal boards that were meaningless in an Orwellian drip manner that displaced them cautiously with members of other communities, especially Kalenjins. In 1982, February, Moi felt powerful enough to finally move against his former Kikuyu patrons. And then Kenya, since the banning of the KPU in 1969, had simply been a de facto rather than de jure single-party state. In theory, other political parties were allowed to challenge KANU's monopoly of power, but all such attempts had been rejected by the Registrar of Societies. Rumors abounded in Nairobi before the Air Force attempted coup of a plot by Kikuyu officers to overthrow the president when he was attending the Organization of African Unity conference in Tripoli over the second weekend in August. When Luo junior officers and other rank and file Air Force members struck fast, all was thrown into confusion. Although the army put down the coup, the delayed response of the army and police revealed the High Command's lack of loyalty to the president. Major General Kariuki of Air Force and Police Commissioner Ben Gethi, two Kukes, were discovered to be disloyal, and for the first time, Moi became seriously concerned about Charles Njonjo's continued loyalty to him as president. The coup attempt transformed Kenya's political scene. Severely shaken, President Moi relied increasingly upon Army Chief of Staff Major General Jackson Mulinge Amkamba, who had remained effective during the confused events of the 1st and 2nd August, and General Muhammad a Somali. For nearly a year, Mulinge, Muhammad, and other senior army officers exerted almost as much influence over Kenya's government decisions, perhaps even more than members of the KANU cabinet. Okay. This is from this book, Political Parties After Political Parties. Professor Iossel talked about transitions. Some of you, like Dr. Ombogi, may know, I was here, but I was in Parkland's law school. But my interests had always remained and still remain English. This book combined my love of English, my great love of history, and also religion, because those were three topics that even in high school, I was very good at, and somewhere near the creme de la creme: history, English, and religion. So we'll get our man of global transitions, and he's going to tell you about a transitional period at the same time as that happened, what was going on in 1982 in the Soviet Union. So, Michel.
Okay. Before I get to 1982, let me just give Russia, Soviet Union has been a country of transitions, at least during my lifetime. I was born after Stalin's death. Stalin, as you may know, ruled Soviet Union for 24 years. And over that period of time, he managed to kill in excess of 10 million innocent people for no particular reason. So it was, I wrote about that. The title of my last book, Love Like Water, Love Like Fire, is my rendition of one night in the life of my grandparents in 1939, during the height of Stalinist terror, the years of Stalinist terror. Shortly after Stalin's death, Khrushchev initiated the so-called thaw, which is to say, the liberalization of Soviet society. He gave a speech at the secret speech at the 20th Congress of the Communist Party, in which he essentially dethroned Stalin. He said that Stalin was not the domestic god of the century, but a murderer. He needed it for his own political purposes. He himself was very much implicated in Stalin's crimes. And that was the time, late 50s, early 60s, was the time of great liberalization in the Soviet Union. It opened up to the rest of the world. Suddenly there were foreign youth, foreign students, foreign tourists. It was a joyous time for my parents' generation. That period ended in 1968 with the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia. In 1964, Khrushchev was deposed by Brezhnev and his group of co-conspirators. And ever since then, liberalization started dwindling down. And after invasion of Czechoslovakia in 1968, it became what is known in Soviet history, late Soviet history, as the period of stagnation, which is to say it was like low clouds hanging over life, like lead-laden. Nothing, it was not terror, it was not Stalinist excesses, it was not arrests necessarily, but it was a highly repressive totalitarian regime where nothing was happening. Life froze, as it were. And so Brezhnev, towards the end of his life, and he died in 1982 on November 10th, and I have in this book story, The Night When Brezhnev Died. And actually, I also had a story in the New Yorker published the night Andropov died. Can you hear with this microphone? I think it's echoing. Yeah, Brezhnev became, in the last 5 or 6 years of his life, he was decrepit and highly, and basically dysfunctional, but the Politburo would not let him retire. And he had numerous strokes. His speech was slurred. He could barely understand his surroundings. And we, the very young people at that point, had great fun. There were lots of jokes circulating around Soviet Union about him. We had great fun trying to imitate his speech, which was cruel, but then again, we, had no particular fondness for him. And in my personal life, I remember how when Brezhnev died, suddenly everything went dark. In the Soviet Union, when a leader died, we knew because they started playing Swan Lake on the radio in the Soviet Union and on television. And so it's always like, when are they going to show us the new installment of Swan Lakes? We were all very keenly appreciative of that. And so I remember, yes, I came from my overnight shift of keeping an eye on the roller coaster and fell asleep. And then a friend of mine woke me up with a phone call, said, turn on the radio. I turned on the radio and then the television. And sure enough, Swan Lake, little swans just dancing around. And we couldn't believe it, just because we sensed that that was the beginning of a new period in our lives. Brezhnev ruled for 18 years. That he was all we knew, essentially, since a fairly early age. And I was supposed to give a reading at the Underground Literary Club that night. And I got there, and of course, the city was in mourning, the lights were off, the underground basement we were gathering was overrun with the KGB. And they still let me read a couple of stories, but with the KGB standing around in the audience, it was a kind of surreal experience, which I don't expect or hope to repeat in my life. Very, very unappreciative audience, stone-faced. So yeah, and what we knew was going to happen is that they would all kind of predictably, Yuri Andropov, the most sinister of Soviet rulers, took over. He was smart. He was the head of the KGB, which means he knew about everything about everyone among his political opponents and among, his political rivals. And very quickly, he started pushing the world towards nuclear annihilation. He engaged in a very eager arms race with the United States. At home, he introduced anti-alcohol campaign and also increased hunt for the dissidents. It was the scariest time. Also, you remember that was the time of, you may not remember, but that was the time when the Soviet Union downed the Korean airliner that somehow tangentially entered the Soviet space and killed 270 people on board for no reason. And so, yeah, but Andropov was in power only for 14 months. He came into office already being literally ill with kidney disease, and he spent the last months of his rule in a hospital, and then he died. And again, we were not completely heartbroken when that happened. And then Brezhnev's old personal friend and completely, useless person named Grigory Chernenko. Konstantin Chernenko came into power, but he already was completely incognizant and disoriented, and predictably he died. And so when Reagan was asked, there is arms race going on, can't you meet one of the Soviet leaders? Said, I would love to, but they keep dying on me. So, and then suddenly, all of a sudden, indeed, in 1985, a totally new face, totally new person came, and his name was Mikhail Gorbachev. He started behaving totally uncharacteristically for a Soviet leader, which is to say, wading into crowds and engaging with people. In other words, he demystified himself. He de-idolized himself. He became like a normal person. We couldn't believe our eyes and ears. And at that point, I had already applied to immigrate for 3 years, for 5 years actually. And suddenly Gorbachev decided that he needed to improve relations with the West in a drastic manner, and that meant letting out of the country tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people like me called refuseniks. And so suddenly one day I got a phone call from Office of Visas and Registration at the KGB, who hadn't called me once in 5 years since I applied to immigrate, and say, where are you? We've been looking for you. And I was in somewhere out of town with friends. I said, well, I haven't heard from you from 5 years. So I assumed that. And so you have 24 days to leave the country. Okay, so that's how it happened. I distinctly remember when I hung up the phone, thinking, so this is how it happens, which is to say your life changes forever in one moment. So that's how it was. That was the period of transition, but several transitions that essentially were the late stage of Soviet history. And then, Gorbachev ushered in eventually the forces that he couldn't control himself. He was a communist. He honestly and fervently believed in the ideas of Leninism and so on. And he just wanted to improve the system because when he started doing the inventory, he realized that Soviet Union had only $80 million on its account. Soviet Union engaged in Star Wars with Reagan, right? So he decided to start tinkering with the Soviet economy. He decided to lift the lid of that pressure cooker, and of course the lid flew off. And the head of steam hit him in the face, and he was basically soon lost his grip on power. And then Yeltsin came, and after glasnost and perestroika, which in Russian is openness and restructuring, and then the free-wheeling 90s, the only period of freedom that Russia is known up to date. And then in 2000, Putin came and started returning Russia back into unfreedom, essentially. So yeah, at next installment, or if you want me to, at some point, I can read a very short piece about Andropov's death and how I found out about it. Do you want me to? Are you going to send me a note saying I should stop somewhere? Yes, I think that's how long it is, anyways. Yeah. The night Andropov died. It was an evening like many others. The dedicated drunks, Lyoha and Olezhik, two of my fellow security guards at the Krestovsky Island amusement sector of the Leningrad Central Park of Culture and Leisure, were sitting at the large plywood-topped table in the main room of the amusement sector's administration cabin, finishing the last of 3 bottles of toxic ersatz port purchased with money I had given them earlier in the afternoon at the nearest liquor store, the one on Bolshaya Zelenina Street, some 10 bus stops away, in exchange for their agreeing to take my shift at some unspecified point in foreseeable future. The two could not have looked more dissimilar. Lyoha, who was in his 30s, was flaxen-haired, flat-nosed, pale-eyed, void of any hint of muscle tone, while Olezhik, pushing 60, presented to the world a cue-ball, bold, sharp-featured countenance, yet trumping all the superficial differences between them was the simple, hard fact that both of them belonged to the timeless, ageless, million-strong army of eternal Russian alcoholics. For the past couple of hours, they had been complaining bitterly to each other about their lives. They effectively had none. No families of their own, no money, no worldly possessions to speak of, just the acrid smell of their tiny rooms in decrepit, overcrowded communal flats, and no realistic expectations of any kind for a better, more dignified future. While they talked, I was reclining with my eyes half closed in a half-broken armchair by the window, beyond which, in the dark, in the meager moonlight, covered in snow, loomed the hulking diplodocus of the city's only and the country's oldest roller coaster. It was enormous, ominous, and comforting at the same time. The Russian for roller coaster means American hills. You could always simply kill yourself, Lyoha suggested to Olezhik in a solicitous tone. As long as there is death, there is hope. That's something always to look forward to. Don't lose heart. There is tunnel at the end of the light. Pouring out into 2 cheap faience couples the remain of the swill of the bottle, Olezhik shook his head with a heavy sigh. Too late, Lyoha, too late. I missed my opportunity to kill myself when the time was right, and now it's just too late. Now I'll just have to wait until it happens naturally in due course of my growing decrepitude. There is nothing to be done about it now. Okay, well, here's the merciful death. He raised his cup with his pinky held apart from the rest of his dirty hirsute fingers, delicately, high society style. So this is how this very short story starts, but then in the end they live, and I extract from the office of the administrator the shortwave radio, which I'm not supposed to have, and then suddenly I hear on the Voice of America that Andropov died, and the world has changed forever for me.
Yeah. Thank you, Misha. That's beautiful, just as always. One thing about these crossroads of words, when we use words, is that, and for me, this has always held an eternal fascination. It's just the way we are able to be transported into entirely other strange realities. And if the writer is a person like Misha or the speaker, then those words stop being strange ones, and soon they become familiar to you, even as they remain separate. And yeah, so thank you for bringing that reality to us from another era. I can see Dr. Mbogo smiling there because he's thinking, words, why can't we just turn it all into theater? Which, of course, that theater is the foremost function of that. Okay. Now, we live in times where, and Mikhail is going to expound on this, these days, the only thing we think about, we were just joking with Dr. Umbongi, that at least we are still free to talk here. It's not like now, the 80s, it's not 1984. But that's all we've been left. The only thing we have free in Kenya now is free speech. Everything else just keeps getting more expensive. Mikhail was here 5 months ago, and he just noted randomly, was like, prices seem to have gone up. Yeah, and now we haven't even had the budget for 2024. Yeah, I hope Okoiti Omtata stops it. But so there was a time, maybe it was because we were children, and this is an urban story, it's from Meet the Umtitas. There was a season, and I remember it was just one season. It was in the year 1990, at least for me, but I think also for a lot of people who used to go to Nairobi show, this thing called Nairobi show. Of course, now there are people who've made it in the city. Their children are city people. And, we still have the malls and so on. But there was a time it was a general thing. Whether you're from East Lando, everyone would go to Nairobi show. And that was an utopian time. I like to call it the last year of utopia. And Nairobi shows the embodiment. So I'll read very briefly, and you'll see from the cornucopia of plentiness, the banquet that Nairobi show was. And I don't think we have that anymore. And we keep longing for those times. The Kibaki era is a whole different story, but this one is colored with teenagehood. So this is just the character is called Tommy. He's 18, and he's with some girl called Angel. I mean, in a very innocent way. So, wewe cheka tu, Angel said, and turned away to look at the sheep, thinking of what beautiful white sweaters their wool would make once they were sheared, especially for the cold June, July weather. These days, even climate, July is hot sometimes. After that, the train rolled through the poultry stand, setting up an almighty squawking from the chickens, cackling from the geese, and hissing and turkey attacks from the Thanksgiving birds that must be the only things glad they were not born in the USA, Tommy said. You must always think of every animal in its food form, Angel scolded. That's the eventual fate of all domestic fowls, isn't it? Tommy said in his defense, and now knew what she had meant by you. talking of food, after the train of all shapes, sizes, and colors, here they were in the grand food stands of the Nairobi show, where a large city clock said it was now 52 minutes past 5. But some people are still But some people are still crowded around the food stands, getting either late lunch or early dinner. I cannot tell, Angel observed. Oh, well, Tommy shrugged. Mom said some folks have no body clocks. They're always hungry. The hungry people are like Massey Ferguson tractors. They come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. They were the anxious-looking Ask staff, looking hot and bothered in their khaki outfits, round capes, women with babies in prams as their hurried husbands held out 100-shilling notes for food. The phenomenon of single moms still being a decade or so away, as women born in 1969 and after stopped caring so much about creating strictly nuclear families, men with tight jeans and sideburns hitting 40 plus, those who just wouldn't let the 1970s go. They were the little troops of Boy Scouts and squaddies of Girl Guides around the stands, looking proud of their uniforms, telling each other to always be prepared for what they did not know. It was better that they did not know. They were the outrightly fat folks who waddled for food by shifting their weight from side to side like cartoon ducks. They were the cool teens in their 1980s police shades, smelling of Brute, Limar, and you. Guys in Pakalewis Hawaii shirts, girls in sundresses with bikers beneath, mingling uneasily, the mothers with big paper shopping bags that said Nairobi Show 1990s, Buddhas and Grand Buddhas in their 50s who couldn't resist the cheap allure of the paper cups that said Jamhuri Park, given for free at every entrance that the cool peeps would not touch over my dead head, and of course the little kids with their plastic watches and plastic sunglasses, one of our clown-painted faces. All these folks crowded and flanked the entire length of Nairobi Show food booths, sipping milkshakes that came in vanilla or strawberry or chocolate flavors, taking big bites off hot dogs and little bites off smokies, licking the picked tops of dairy milk ice cream, drinking 7-Up, Tarino, Miranda sodas, crunching on potato chips, crisps, munching popcorn, the kids enjoying a meal other than ugali, sukuma wiki, nyama, and githeri that constituted their daily fare at the Nairobi Show. Okay, thank you. We will now have a professor. Thank you. We'll have Professor Mikhail Lossel. Yes, and he's going to talk about the same thing, what it was like in 1980 with rubles, because these days in our own Kadogo economies and brand shifting, I always say for those entrepreneurs, okay, now where the Kikuyus among us, you should have alternatives to the main brands. And I think people will really go for that. So that instead of Omo, you have Homo, for example, and you're good to go. Okay, Misha. Yes.
So sure, I'll read beginning of it's not really even a story. I sort of like at some points there, it was all this text you can find if you're interested in its entirety on the New Yorker website under my name. And so Soviet 12 Days of Christmas, I just thought when I started working as an engineer after graduating from college, what was the buying capacity of my salary of 120 rubles? So it starts like, so at my first post-college job as an entry-level engineer in the Department of Submarine Screening Demagnetization at Leningrad Central Naval Electronics Research Institute, I was paid 120 rubles a month. In 1980, to the best of my sporadic recollection, and with the aid of some perfunctory and doubtless imprecise online research, with 120 rubles in a large Soviet city, one could afford 12,000 boxes of matches, 50 matches per box, 12,000 glasses of carbonated water, no fruit syrup, from a street vending machine, 12,000 standard pencils, 12,000 slices of bread at a public cafeteria, 6,000 payphone calls, 4,000 glasses of carbonated water with fruit syrup, flavor indeterminable, from a street vending machine, 4,000 small 0.25-liter mugs of kvass, a popular Russian drink, from a street vendor, 4,000 copies of most Soviet daily newspapers, Pravda, Leningradskaya Pravda, Izvestia, Soviet Sports, and so on. 4,000 streetcar rides, 4,000 glasses of tea with no sugar at the cafeteria, 4,000 eraser-tipped standard pencils, 3,000 trolley bus rides, 3,000 hot meat, cabbage, liver, potato, fish, piroshki, dumplings from a street vendor, 2,400 metro bus Ferris wheel rides, 2,004 sprigs of dill, parsley from a street vendor, 2,400 bubliks, a fresh Russian bagel of sorts, donut, 2,400 table tennis balls, 2,400 tins of mint tooth powder, 2,400 glassfuls of sunflower seeds from a street vendor. 2,000, you're getting the picture. 2,000 large 0.5 liter mugs of kvass, 2,000 regular postcards, 2,000 meat patties, котлеты, at a cafeteria, which burger, basically, 2,000 small tins of vitamin C, 1,710 paper cups of fruit ice cream, 1,710 buzz cuts at a barber shop, 1,710 portions of generic vegetable salad cafeteria, and 1,710 standard strength light bulbs. 1,500 pryaniki, hard honey cakes, 1,500 standard pocket-sized notebooks, 1,500 glasses of birch tree juice, Russians drink that, at a grocery store counter, and so on. 1,333 paper cups of milk ice cream, 1,200 glasses of tomato juice at the grocery store, 1,200 kilos of salt, 1,200 boiled sausage sandwiches at a cafeteria, 1,200 kilos of potatoes, 1,200 boxes of mustard plaster, 1,090 hot, large, open-faced meat piroshki at a cafeteria, 1,090 copies of literary newspapers, which is large, thick newspaper, 1,090 portions of chocolate ice cream on a stick, 1,000 kilos of carrots, 923 chicken eggs, 923 standard loaves of wheat or white bread. In other words, food was cheap, but clothes and electronics and everything was. So I'll read you from the end. Yeah. Yeah. 17 wooden chairs, 14 pairs of made in China summer sandals, 12 kilos of chocolate truffles, 12 Leningrad Moscow train rides, 11 half linen tablecloths, 10 wooden tennis rackets, 10 months worth of apartment fees in theory, because I didn't pay any apartment fees. I just squatted. 7 regular shirts, 7 shirts, 7 Leningrad Moscow plane flights, 6 inexpensive photo cameras, 5 flights to the Black Sea, Odessa, Simferopol, 4 pairs of Soviet-made dress shoes, 3 vacuum cleaners, 2 cheap bicycles, 1.8 Soviet-made suits, 0.8 Soviet fall coats, 0.67 flights to the other end of the country, Vladivostok, 0.67 pairs of black market jeans, if you're lucky. 0.6 cheap black and white TV sets, 0.4 cheap bicycles, 0.35 Vega record players, 0.3 Minsk or comparable class refrigerators, 0.27 portable electronica mini TV, 0.17 color TVs, 0.0024 Moskvich 412 automobiles, 0.100000 most other automobiles, and being young and carefree, well, priceless, obviously. So that's how much it cost, yeah. Actually, Yeah, some of you, since you mentioned Binyavanga just now, let me just tell you very, very briefly how. So somewhere in late 90s, I start getting the idea that I want to organize literary conferences, literary programs in different parts of the world, starting, of course, with my hometown of St. Petersburg, which is the most literary probably city in the world, not because people read books there necessarily, but because it was basically a literary project and in the head of Peter the Great. And so, yeah, somewhere between 99, we started having those programs. They started tiny, and then they grew very quickly. And eventually, in 2005, we even managed to bring several Kenyan writers, including Tony, right, and including Binyavanga, and including Billy Kahora and Ivona Vor, and current representative of Kenya at the United Nations, Martin Kimani, and several Ugandan writers, Doreen Baingana and Jackie Batanda, and so forth. And so that was a lot of fun. So over the years, we started having those programs in St. Petersburg, and eventually it was well over 1,000 students from across the United States, mainly, and faculty, some of the greatest writers in the world. And so then we opened program in Lithuania. And at some point, I found myself in Kenya, and I was having at the coffee shop at the Yaya Center was the late journalist who wrote for The Nation, Betty Kaplan. You remember her, right? Yeah, and so she was wonderful and unfortunately died young. And so I was talking to her about my literary programs in St. Petersburg, and I said that it would be kind of interesting to explore the idea of having one here as well. And she said, well, then you need to talk to this person who just got back from South Africa because he's organized a group of writers around him and they're meeting at the house of Ali Zaidi. And they're just a publisher of a Nation. And they engage in literary projects. And he's the one who's there. I said, well, what's his name? I said, Binyavanga Wainaina. And she said, and I said, okay, well, how do I find him? I said, well, let me see if I can find him. And then there is this huge dude sitting right at the next table in a poncho and dreadlocks just turns around and said, did somebody say literary conferences? And that was Binyavanga drinking coffee. And that very evening, he came to, I was at Lillian Towers at that point. He came there and we started trying to figure out how to start the literary program here as well. So that was my recollection of Binyavanga, with whom we, of course, later became close friends and so forth. So he was one of the most uniquely talented writers I've ever met in my life, like naturally gifted.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Prof, for that reminiscence of our friend and a Kenyan legend. And yeah, I want to say, please, make sure you see me, everyone in this room, if you're interested in literature. Well, not you, Dr. Mbongi, you, I'll come to you, as always. But please see me if you're interested in literary programs, because Mikhail, that was Summer Literary Seminars, SLS, but he just founded another one post-COVID called the International Literary Seminars. I'm happy to see the winner of of the latest award is here, Gloria. Yeah, I don't know how she sneaked in. She has just arrived. Yes, and she's also won a scholarship to Concordia, where Professor Mikhail teaches. And purely by merit, I can tell you, having worked and seen Gloria through the years of AMCA. So yeah, please see me because I would want us all to be part of this second part. Binyavanga was the first wave, and I always say, there's always a chapter twos. Yeah, if Misha can start ILS again and have other people, you can be part of this second part of this journey. Me, I'm like that old railway engine driver for old Kenya Railways. Even if there's a third program, nitakuwa huko tu at different stages of our lives. So now I'll do something very brief because We are talking about contested spaces. Yes, don't worry, Dr. Mbongi. I'm totally very aware of the time. And so will Misha. I'll write, because this is the last part of this part of things. It's, the internet is a contested space. Mikhail will talk about a more contested space. How every people are always trying to sneak into America. And you'll see from his US border patrol story, a bit of how even when you're there, even those who belong there, it's still a hard space to get into. But this one is from my book 2063. So this is long before 2063 about the internet people and their hopes. You know, we're always dreaming of escape, and the internet has provided a way. And sometimes people try to make us the victims. So this is a guy from Nepal called Sanjeep, and he's interacting with the character, the hero of the story called Morgan, Chamaroche. And it's not yet in the future. Sanjeep Nepali's messages are in his wrist box inbox, of course, and Morgan Chamaroche cannot help taking this sterile back and forth chit chat that they have been having with the would-be young conman from Nepal from the top. Sanjeep, hi. Chamaroche, Sanjeep, have you had a little sip? Sanjeep, zip? No sip. Please, I'm only child. Mother died when I was born. Morgan, I'm very sorry to hear that, Sanjeep. Where are you from? Sanjeep, Nepal, and you? Chamaroche, Kenya. Sanjeep, Kenya, very good. How old are you and what do you do? Chamaroche, I'm almost 88, so you could say I'm retired. I bet. Sanjeep, you bet? You bet what? Morgan, I bet even on cricket. Do you like cricket? Sanjeep, no. I studied to be medical surgeon stroke technician. Chamaroche, wow, young man, I've never heard of that one. Sanjeep, it is there, it is here. Nepal, I am orphan, no zip. Morgan, I'm sorry to hear that, Sanjeep. Did your dad also die at childbirth? Sanjeep, yes, please. It is my granddad who bring me my brothers and sisters up, but he passed away 2 years ago on. Morgan, I thought you said you're an only child, Sanjeep. Sanjeep, yes, only need 250 sterling pounds in Kenya money to complete study. I'm 18, I'm final semester. Please help me, orphan. Morgan, I appreciate that you are an orphan. What confuses me is if you are an only child or not. Sanjeep, yes, homely child, very homely. No smoke, no drink, no drugs, homely. Only 250 sterling in Kenya money to complete study at CTVET. 2 semester study charge. Morgan, slow down, Sanjeep. You're losing me here. What is CTVET? Sanjeep, Council of Technique Education Vocational Training. Morgan, what? Council of Technique Education and Vocational Training. Chamaroche, vocational training. Yes, help me study 250 sterling pound Kenya money only semester. Morgan, you want to study to be a vocational trainee or to be the counsel to vocational trainees or the technique of being the counsel to vocational trainees? Sanjeep, everything but no fee, 250 sterling pound, money only per annus, of course. Help me. Morgan, okay, my new pen pal from Nepal. Sanjeep, very good. God bless it you. Send for Eastern Consolidation Union. Transfer with password. Okay. I'll stop there for those ambitious and contested spaces by everybody from Nepal, Nigeria, and yes. So we're back to Mikhail, and yes, we should be. So yes, it's 1539. Yeah. So yeah. So it's going to be so. Any questions on this Kenyan thing before for 5 minutes before I pass this to Misha for the next about 45? All at once, eh? Okay. Yes. Yes. Yeah. 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 Of course, we always follow your true North Star. So yeah, Misha, I think Yeah, a little bit from the US border control, 5 minutes, and then, yeah, yeah. And then, yeah, they're from the US. Yeah, yeah. I was really trying to fit into that. Yeah.
Whatever you say. Yeah. Well, the city of my birth and the first 30 years of my life was only 4-hour car drive from Helsinki, capital of Finland. And it was a whole different world. So I always lived in liminal border spaces. On a good sunny day, you could see from the shore of the Gulf of Finland, one of those beachfront facilities, the settlements not far from Leningrad, Solnichne, Repine, Komarova. On a good day, you could see the very vague outline of the Finnish shore, so it seemed reachable by sea, but it also was a world away. It could have been, the moon was easier to reach. And when I became member of that underground literary club in Leningrad, the space that we were given first was in the basement of a building that was barely 50 meters away from the US Consulate General in Leningrad, as though to indicate to us the sheer enormity of the distance. You would come there and you would look to your right and you would see that US Consulate General guarded by the KGB and Marines, US Marines and so forth. And you realize that here it is, it's just here, the other world, the other side of the world, but it's completely unreachable. So I think they gave that space to remind of the complete unbridgeability of that space. So yeah, and of course, the Soviet-Finnish border was probably the most stringently guarded border in the world, completely electronically. A large animal would set off major alarm, like a moose. And then there would be like a big hunt for the moose trying to cross into Finland. So I've known in my life several people who were killed trying to escape, well, through by Black Sea to Turkey, 80 miles by sea from Batumi, the southern tip of Georgia, to Turkey, and also was taken to the Georgian-Turkish border by the border guard general to show the Turkish side. And again, the same strange feeling. It's here. Dogs are on that side, like they look exactly like our Soviet dogs, but they're Turkish dogs. They're the capitalist world dogs. Are they luckier than me? Well, they don't know what to do with this freedom necessarily. They just look like they just okay, but they're free dogs. And so, yeah, and now I live an hour away from the US border, and being dual citizen of US and Canada, I go to New York often because that's where my friends live, lots of my friends. And every time, well, I usually take a bus, and the bus usually comes at midnight because I like night buses, and the bus comes to US border, and then every time I have interesting conversations with the border guards, somehow they're memorable. So I decided to write one down, and that's US border. On the way back, by the way, from New York to Montreal, Canadian border guards that just, they're completely uninterested in you, in their lives, in anything. They just wave you through, but not so US border guards. So Customs Border Patrol officer, a tall, burly, somewhat goofy-looking young man, waves me over, saying something I cannot make out because of the general din in the large echoing space. Me approaching, handing him my passport, taking off my hat. Hi, how are you? Customs Border Patrol officer. Professor? Me, I beg your pardon? CBPO, chuckling ironically. Are you a professor by any chance? Me, yes, I am actually. Well, how did you? He grinning. Didn't you hear me just now when I said professor, looking at you? I immediately thought when I saw you, this guy must be a professor. He just looks like one. That's why I said professor. And you're just telling me now that you actually are a professor? I said, me, yes, I actually am one. Huh, well, that's kind of funny. Him, you could say that again. It's kind of hilarious. We look at each other, um, smiling for a couple of seconds. Him, well, and where and what do you profess, professor, if I may be permitted to ask me, at a university up in Montreal, creative writing, literature, you know? Creative writing, you mean stories and stuff? Me, yes, stories and stuff. Him, I was in a writing workshop once in high school, wrote a story about a man who's like driving on a highway all through the night, and it's like pitch dark outside because it's nighttime, but then it gets to be dawn in theory, and then morning and so on, but it's still just as dark everywhere, endless darkness, and he realizes, much to his horror, that it's going to be like this forever now, going forward. The sun has just forgotten to come up, like for the first time in a billion years, so he'll always be doomed to keep driving on this empty highway in the dark now with no destination in sight for the rest of his natural life. And also he has this magical capacity to turn invisible at will. That guy driving in the dark after drinking his secret potion, like admixture of his own invention, he would turn invisible and start punishing bad people in that state like an invisible and therefore much more efficient Batman. That's kind of a parallel storyline. But his dog, his only true friend, an Afghan, so beautiful, so no one believes he actually is its owner, which constantly pisses him off a little. That dog doesn't have the same ability to turn invisible, and that leads to a whole bunch of serious complications in his life. Me, sounds interesting. Him, nah, it was stupid. But anyway, actually, let me ask you, since I have an actual professor in front of me, how do you tell people that their stories like suck, which I'm sure they often do? You know, I guess while I'm actually asking you is, how can you tell a good story from a bad one in the first place? How do you always know? Me, I don't always know, but I'll tell you, it's much easier to say why a poorly written story is bad than why a really good story is good. Him, yeah, I suppose. Although, frankly, I didn't understand what you just said. But anyway, so you live in Montreal? Me, I do. Him, lowering his voice. So how is it up there? Me, also lowering my voice. It's okay. Him, lowering his voice even further. And you were born in Russia? Me, practically whispering, I was. Him, a strange choice of a place to be born, I have to tell you. Well, anyway, um, cool coincidence, wouldn't you say? Me, yeah, real unusual. Um, shall we take a selfie together? Um, we both laugh. He hands me back my passport. I start walking away. Him, oh, by the way, you're not bringing in any illegal substances, are you? Me, turning back half straight. No, no way. Him, didn't think so, but still thought I should ask. Okay, yeah.
Okay. Fine. It's very nice to see all those smiles after story post-smile glow, the post-smile glow. So now, I like that Prof is a stickler for time. Huh? Yeah, yeah. So we'll start, yeah, of course, with the audience here. So we are going to have 10 minutes. I'll take any of the Kenyan questions or comments on the things you have spoken about. And I'll just take 5 minutes from here and 5 minutes from there. And then we are going to give Prof about 30 minutes, and if it's very exciting, which I'm sure it will be, 45 minutes. So between 30 and 45. So yeah, any comments about the Kenyan thing or observations or questions from our era? Yes, and introduce yourself.
Hello, My name is Gloria, also Gloria Masheti. So happy to hear the stories. Thank you for reading them to us. I'm just curious, having gone through all the experiences that you have, is it possible, and specifically referencing the Crossroads stories, is it possible for reality to beat expectation? I don't know if I'm making sense, because when we're at a point of crossroad, there is optimism, there is all this, but somehow nostalgia always seems to win. And then in the future, we are very, not bitter, but we are, I wish it was how it was back then. So I haven't had many scenarios or many stories of where a crossroad has happened and then it's actually better than it was. So is that a possibility, or no, life only gets worse?
Yeah. Thank you, Gloria. That's a beautiful question. I like that your name is also Machete. Yeah. Just don't visit Kigali soon. They may not welcome you to Gali. Yes. What I'm going to say is it helps, like my experience, I know it's St. Petersburg. It still remains for me the most beautiful place in the world. But I now realize 20 something years after I first went there, it helped that first I'd read Mikhail's essay, This City. So I'd already built something in my mind. And then on the very first day, yeah, in this beautiful, was it the library place, Mayakovsky? There was this welcoming thing, with all the vodka and all the clever people. And then Misha already said what the city is. He said, we'll be living in multiplicities of reality. I've never forgotten that we'll be living. So that city became to me that. It became this place, and then all these clever people and literature, and then the white knights. And no city on earth has ever equaled that experience, because sometimes even the words that are created, and then of course I knew that, Dostoevsky was from there. We went to the cemeteries, we went to Nabokov House. So it became magic. I used to look forward to those trips. And I've been to many other places after that, but no experience has ever equaled that. And when I went back in 2018, no, not with the SLS program, I went to cover the World Cup. Quite a bit of the magic was lost. Because yes, it was still fun. There are all these World Cup people, but I found I was resenting them that they are not literature people. Yeah. Okay, they are hooligans from like Mexico. And I love football, but I try to go back to the same places, and there are all these football people. And it was disappointing in that way. And the character of the country had changed. You could feel the magic, you could feel the Putinism. Also, maybe because I was also reading continuously, interested, and I could see, like I'd come to hate Putin, and then Russians had gotten more nationalistic, this in 2018. And you see the horrors that were unleashed later, but you could feel it in the air. So it was like a magical place, like when I was in my 30s, the transition. And then I go back at, when I'm almost in my 40s, for still a great event like the World Cup. I'm there for a whole month. But that's what happens. It's like at a college sweetheart, you have the most fantastic time. You go away abroad, or, one of you goes. Then when you reunite, there's a cynicism that has been created. So yes, that's how it was. Okay. Is there one online? Because I think I only have space I only have 5 more minutes. Anyone online? Oh? Oh, okay. Okay. Unmute. Mhm. Yeah. If you have a question, you can. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Then we'll come back here. Yes. Dr. Fred Mbogo. Yeah. my starry brother. Unless, yes, okay.
Good afternoon.
Please stand up. Griffin didn't teach you to sit down.
I feel like sitting. I don't want to know you to know how tall I am, since you have insisted. So I just, I just want to maybe problematize the occasion. I mean, because we've been listening to stories that are, say, Russian and so on, and then Nairobi stories and so on. And currently we are grappling in these spaces called universities with things called uselessness of degree courses. It's a new word that's floating around this week. So I wanted to know, I mean, why should we care about listening to stories from elsewhere? Especially because that elsewhere, in this case, Russia, seems to have been struggling with a lot of ideologies and a lot of management issues, or if you want, governance issues, which are uniquely Soviet, USSR, Russian, etc. While we are also, for ourselves, struggling with other issues, post-colonial and so on. Where do we meet? Is it possible to merely just decide to take personal stories and therefore decide to just reason with these stories as human beings to human beings? Or I guess maybe there's no question in that thing. It's just trying to understand, how can I come into these stories and get out of them with something that possibly makes me whether better or make me understand my surrounding in a clearer fashion. I don't know. Yeah.
And answer them together. Okay. No, let me just answer that one. Yeah, please. Very briefly, because after that, then yours, and then on to Professor Mikhail. Thank you. Yeah, you are right about it being a problematic question, and Michel answered the second bit of it about the Soviet ideologies, so that we don't mix them up with current Russia, although he did explain a lot of the transitions that have happened in that country. Dr. Fred, I know that's a bit mischievous, but I'm happy because you're a clever monkey. Yeah? And I mean that in a very good organic way. A lot of people, PK is here too. A lot of people, Kenya has become this country. The most dangerous thing that is happening right now is the mercantile nature of this nation. People say the uselessness of degrees. We have been reduced to these people, proper rats, but rats without a context. We exist within vacuums of stories, and it's deliberate. You see our political class, right now, all of them. If you take today's Nation headline, UDA in turmoil. Cleophas Malala wants to kick out Kuria, dreadful fellow, my old classmate Murkomen, but we are now existing in this era of the hustlers, even when they are the biggest thugs. But when you have a hustler mentality and no stories, you have no context. So the importance of things we have been saying today about, Moi in 1982, those transitions, we are getting a generation. I don't know how many of you saw the video, it went viral, of those Gen Zs at Tomboya's statue, and they had no idea who that was. They had no idea. Yet we're in the age of information. We have the most information. They have smartphones, and yet we have the most ignorant, both incoming generation, school syllabuses, history is being decimated there. Dr. Umbongi will agree, and it's deliberate. If you don't have stories, you don't have continuums, you don't have context, you don't have anything to refer to either revolt or to think. So you exist in what I can call a TikTok vacuum. You can have movement and things that please you. You can have these things because you have no history. So you don't know, and then you don't have crosswords. You don't know what happened, let's say, in the Soviet Union, what's going on in Russia. You don't understand America. Just know this Trump, if you even do. You don't know Tom Mboya, and you're at his statue. I mean, people who are being interviewed, you have no idea who that is. What a terrible world. You just have a Chinese app, maybe, and you know, I have nothing against the Chinese completely. But you have your app, you have your TikTok, and you're talking to each other, and the things you're talking are of within vacuous context. Within vacuous context. That's why it's important. When we read these stories of 1990, or we talk of 2063, it's that context so that even when we are being destroyed, at least we are knowing what, even if we are accepting it or we are not accepting it, but we know we could be more heroic, we could be different. We understand the past for our present to create the future. Because without history, you have no story. You're nothing. Yeah, you're just a tick-tock waiting for the bomb to go off.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Mikhail. I will ask questions to both of you, and you will answer them depending on who it falls on. But first, this is very interesting, particularly for us historians. And I could see friends of ours here, both my colleagues from the department here and my brother from Memphis and my very good friend Nico from York. As historians, this is really very, very, very interesting. Crosswords of words. You know, as I listened, I could hear of, you know, life in transitions, you know, multiple identities and contradictions of global citizen, which you seem to be, Miguel. But I will follow up really what that lady was asking, and I think it was indirectly reinforced by the gentleman. Now, how do these stories represent real people? Historians, we are concerned with real people, real situations, and real lives. You know, how, and because as you spoke, I could get some resonance to some of the themes we have discussed in this forum before. Dr. Gona was here. Oh, he's still around. I had your underground movements, the issue of underground movements here. I could hear the histories of heterogeneity in the way we appropriate, you know, social reality, which we have talked about in this forum. If was literally people, and you have very interesting backgrounds, very interesting for the students here. Mikhail was an engineer. This is a lawyer. And look at what they are doing with their lives. I don't know what that says to you as a student, both at your MA and BA, and what does that say to you? So help us just connect all this to real lives. Historians, we are interested in HNC and all that. I will ask another question so that you answer both of them. I have a second one. You know, Tony, I don't know. The Nairobi's Night Runner. This is on a light note. What influenced that title, whether it is history, culture, or personal experiences, but you will tell us that. Now, as I listened to your stories about Nairobi, Tony, and St. Petersburg, I started questioning what we were reading in the 90s, late 90s, about this great political scientist, Horowitz, Ivan Louis Horowitz, who wrote this famous book, The Three Worlds of Development, and defined the first world, the second world, and the third world. We have now moved away from those characterizations, and we are more talking about the global north and the global south. And Prof, the kind of Soviet Union you described and the kind of Nairobi that Tony described were strikingly similar. You know, he spoke of squalor, deprivation, oppression, you know, social struggles, name it. Then what happened to this classification? Because if my memory serves me well, the Soviet Union was supposed to be the second world where things were likely to be better than they were in the third world that Nairobi was at the time in the 80s and probably in the 90s. So was this characterization, you know, hot air? For Kenyans who are here? Was it just hot air? Was it just, you know, something that does not exist in the real world on the ground? Your comment on that would be very highly appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah. So I'll just answer the one question, and it's my last contribution before I hand it over to the esteemed Professor Mikhail. I'm going to say, because you asked me a very specific thing about Nairobi Night Runner. I sort of know why you asked. Yeah. And we've had this cultural, I remember Dr. Gona's great presentation and done on Bukusu and so on. So, of course, it was informed also by Kisi night running. Yeah, that is definite. Yeah. Actually, my great-grandfather was a night runner. That's another, yeah. He was killed in 1912. He was shot by a Briton who didn't quite understand these things. It's very well known in Bomachoge. Then his son was killed in a more heroic manner. That one is buried in Moshi. My paternal grandfather was killed in Japan, in Burma, by the Japanese at the Battle of Akpa. But him is buried with, is the one we talk about. We don't mention his father. Yeah, a priest took in my grandfather. So there's that. And then we have a night runner here, my fellow fellow nocturnal man, Patrick Kariuki, will explain that there was an era when that thing, because I think he also wrote a column on that, it was very fashionable to run around in Nairobi, those Binyavanga years. I don't know what we were trying to discover, but we had romanticized our city, the underbelly, what happens when the sun goes down. So that was also, that's why it's called Nairobi Night Runner, a night guide. And like I'd explained earlier, it was to be a night guide. Everyone was supposed to open that book and see where to go. But like I said, sometimes everything recedes into history and archives and institutions. And what you thought was going to be a map becomes a museum. So thank you. I'm going to pass this on to my mentor, Professor Misha. Take it from here. Thank you.
I don't think I need this. Well, there are more questions here than there are more questions here than we could possibly cover with answers in several hours. For instance, you asked me in your office, Professor, well, it was a rhetorical question, the rise of right-wing politics in Europe and throughout the world. There are very specific reasons for that. There is a very specific reason for why Trumpism preceded Trump. and how it came out of Tea Party USA and how it's connected to the rest of the world. The question by the gentleman there about what specific practical lessons one can derive from the political development first of Soviet Union and Russia, you can view Russia as a cautionary tale. And you can view it as specifically a cautionary tale for Kenya if you want. What Putin did in 1999, 2000, well, first he was very timid in a way, but then oil prices went through the roof. What did Putin do? He immediately started taking independent media. He jailed owners of independent media, television, newspapers. He kicked them out of the country. He subjugated independent media. And though it still seemed like a fairly liberal democratic country, it no longer was. It was hollowed out democracy. It was illiberal democracy. What we're seeing in the world right now is the rise of illiberal democracies. A good example would be Hungary under Viktor Orban. It seems like a democracy. People elect the leader, but then the leader attacks the opposition, closes down independent media, and gets reelected time and time and again. Could it happen in Kenya? Probably. Not unthinkable at all. So that, right? The world is in a state of high disbalance right now. It's in constant motion because of globalization, immigration. The fact that Putin started a war in Europe for the first time since 1945 further destabilized the world in a great way. China is now looking to attack Taiwan. The world is in a state of disarray. Europe is doesn't know how to cope with a very high number of immigrants that leads to the rise of right-wing politicians, obviously. Same in the United States, where tens of millions of people, mainly males, who used to derive their sense of self-worth from being middle class, from working on a conveyor belt and bringing home decent salary, and have 2 cars and a picket fence, and so forth, now are unemployed because all their jobs have been shipped abroad. They are seething with anger, with impotent anger, and of course they blame everyone who is not like them, which is what Trump is all about, a sense of victimhood. It's not my fault that my life has turned out so badly. It's them. Who are them? Well, the elites on both coasts, people who don't look like me, who don't think like me, who don't worship like me, who don't love like me. I am afraid of those people and I hate those people. And so that's the root of Trumpism. And of course, there is violence, obviously. And then there are so many more things that one can talk about. But right now, the world is in probably the greatest state of discord that was in place since 1945, maybe. It's a difficult time everywhere. And that's why when, no country is an island. United States is an island, literally the continent of North America. And that is has its pluses, but it has lots of minuses. Sense of isolation from the world, sense of self-righteousness, sense of belief that we are better than everybody else in the world, and so on and so forth. But there is a powerful movement called America First, that America needs to be isolated from the rest of the world and not get involved anywhere else. That was the case again 100 years ago, approximately, America First movement, when America was not supposed, they were against entering World War II, and so on. Everything is connected. Everything is connected in today's world. And in some strange way, our presence here is part of some larger picture. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Lydia Muthuma. Good afternoon, Professor Dr. Ombongi. Long ago, I was in the Department of History. I am a visual artist, but in the last few years, I have concentrated on telling the story, the history of the arts. Now, I have a question for you, Professor. It may not be directly related to what you read, but I am addressing you as a trainer of creative writers, because I understand you have spent your time doing just that. First of all, it must be very tricky to get another person to be creative, depending on what one understands by creative. And it was very interesting to hear about your transitioning from telling your stories in Russian to telling them in English. And of course, there was a transition, not just in the context, but in the person who is telling the story. Now, here comes my question. I think I do a similar job that you do, and I find it difficult to tell my story without, I'm in the danger of dumbing down, pressing down the creativity of my students. I feel that sometimes I force them to see the world using my eyes, which is not what I want. I want them to make their own story as they live their own lives and learn how to speak not only in their own voice, but using their own tone to choose what they want to tell and tell. And it is a daunting task. If you have tricks to how one achieves that, I would like to hear. Let me give an example that maybe, I don't know how appropriate it is. I truly admire Dostoevsky. I have never visited St. Petersburg. What I know about St. Petersburg is through the literature of the literary works of Dostoevsky. I cannot write like Dostoevsky. I am not even a writer. I suppose because of my history and who I am, I'm able to look at his view, respect it as what it is, appreciate it, and then set out to write my own. And in my career, that's what I try to get my students to do. I do not. Many times, I don't get there. I do not manage. If they admire Dostoevsky, they'll try and use his style of writing. And I want to shout at them, you're not Dostoevsky, you'll never be. Be yourself. How do they retain their authenticity when the teacher, the trainer is desperately trying to get them to be creative without imposing one's own way of seeing the world? Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great question, but its parameters are not necessarily coincide with what I do. I do not teach people to be creative, and I don't try to make them creative. They already are creative. I teach a graduate writing program, which is highly selective. So we accept maybe like 15% of people or 20% of all the people who apply. So I know already that these people want to be writers. And my task is to make them, to find them, help their own voice and to discover something about their right, which is more difficult than, surprisingly, than it is. Opera singers spend years in training trying to find their natural voice without stifling it, without essentially suffocating themselves with trying to imitate somebody else. Same with writers. And I'm just trying to find something in their stories that frees them up. And I try to find the seeds of story that are hidden in the story. And I find the vectors of possible meaning in the story. And I try to reorient them all in the same direction so that they help the story become about something significant. So in other words, I help them discover their stories, which gives me satisfaction because it's a highly creative process for me also, but that is what I do. My suggestion, however, but I also teach undergraduates, and those mainly are teaching literature classes. So we read a large variety of primarily short stories by authors from all over the place, including Africa. And I want them to understand what the author was trying to do. And invariably, I try to pitch higher. So I take the highest common denominator, people who are the most engaged, the most interested, and I appeal to them. And it's the task of other people in class to catch up. I won't pitch lower. I will pitch higher every time. So no need, in my opinion, to try to bring somebody up to the level of your level or somebody else's in class. Just be yourself. The literary equivalent of that would be that in writing my stories in English about Russia, I don't translate Russian reality for the benefit of an American reader. I let them, well, now it's easier with Google, but I let them just to understand it without me explaining it. As a teacher, you have the great capacity to influence them with your passion, with your degree of interest. Energy is highly transferable. It's contagious. If you're passionate about your subject, students will catch on and they will appreciate you for that. Even if what you're trying to teach them necessarily didn't coincide with their personal aesthetic. And those who won't respond to that, you know what? There are different avenues in life. They don't have to be animated by your passion. They will do something else in life. To the best of my ability, I answer your question.
Yes. Jeff can talk through the mic.
Jeff, kindly, no, Misha, just, yeah. Jeff, would you kindly like unmute Usaji and then ask your question?
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Mikhail and Tony. I hope you can hear me.
And clear, thank you.
Thank you. I want to appreciate your presentations, the two paired presentations. In my view, they are what I can call a mutually reinforcing, but although contrasting parallelism. I come from the Department of Literature. That's why I'm using those terms. Two issues that I will want you to respond to, and the issues are intertwined for both of you. First, I was expecting to hear from both of you how you situate yourselves within the historical dialogue, because you are writing in history and you are reflecting historical moments. You are giving us what we call a vivid recording of history, but in a fictionalized presentation. So how do you reflect on these writings of yours? That's something that I didn't get. And then the second is the fact that I've not heard your voices vis-a-vis your contemporaries and also the authors or writers who preceded you. If I just give a short run for Russian writers, for example, the famous Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, Mayakovsky, Maxim Gorky, Sakharov, Vera Figner, and Ginsburg. So I would want Professor Mikhail to try to situate himself within that pantheon, that continuum of those Russian writers. And for Tony, I also would like you to situate yourself within that pantheon of Kenyan writers dating back to our own Ngugi, Michere Mugo, Meja Mwangi, Mailu, Marjorie Oludhe, Margaret Ogola, and your contemporaries, such as Adipo Sidang, Yvonne Owor, and Moragita. Thank you very much.
I'll just answer first so that I quickly, as always, defer to Prof. Thank you very much, Jeff, for your questions. They're both intelligent and slightly unimaginative. I only mean to say unimaginative, intelligent in the sense of, I find them very pertinent. The one about situating yourself, I think takes a right of both great arrogance and a sense of themselves within history to be situating themselves within stories. Where do you place yourself, like G-rank? Yeah, I don't know about that. What I do know is that when I write, like the 4 books I've referred to, if I do Nairobi Night Runner, I spent 1.5 years on Nairobi streets. I took notes, I wrote it. Bas. If I write Meet the Umtitas, I went back to my childhood, 1990, what I thought Nairobi looked like. I wrote it. Bas. If I did political parties, it's an analysis of 60 years of political party history. It was a lot of work during COVID. That was Conrad Adenauer Foundation's commissioned. I needed the money and I wanted to do a good job, one that Dr. Griffin would be proud of. He was, back to washing the cup clean. Bas. So to ask where I rank myself, this is sort of, for me, a bit ridiculous, a bit like the football thing within history. People will rank us. I don't even know what that is. I'm very happy. Today I sing with Dr. Ombongi. If I hear someone is studying, my book here, I've had 1 or 2 for PhD. They're the ones doing the ranking, whether to pass exam, whether nobody ever reads. Their life will rank you. Or you will just feel sad and become a suicidal poet. It's also, they've also been great writers or even failures who are, I can always end up as a suicidal poet, but I should hope not. I should hope that, I keep getting invited to places and I can make a few coppers from the writing, but that's not where I do it. Because when the thing comes and it's a topic or whatever it is, you just do it to the best of your ability. So I can't rank myself anywhere, whether in history or with my contemporaries. Yeah. I won't say that I'm the here to be Nyavanga or, Ngugi wa Thiong'o is, my great shining light. Tuko tu. Okay. No, let me share now first. Yeah,
well, where do I? Well, I situate myself in the very center of world historical process. Seriously though, I was lucky, and I do believe it was luck. A gift is luck, talent is luck, and certain linguistic capacity is luck. I was lucky to pass through this linguistic membrane at my age, probably the only one in my generation of Soviet emigres. And so I'm taking advantage of that because I feel nobody's placed any mission on me, but since I've been able to do this, then I tell certain stories that other people tell in Russian and I do it in English. And so in a way, I'm writing Russian sentences in English. I cannot begin to compare myself to Nabokov or who was a genius, and so on. But seriously speaking, among those names that you mentioned, not all of them were writers to begin with, but in the 19th century, Russian literature passed under the sun, as it were, direct rays of sun. And in a very poor, 80% illiterate country, suddenly one of the greatest literatures in the world emerged. They were geniuses like Tolstoy. You have to read Tolstoy, I think, if you want your life to be a little better. I mean, nobody forces you to, and you don't have to. You'll live a perfectly good life without reading Tolstoy. But with reading him, might become a little better. And same with Chekhov. Dostoevsky was, God forbid for any of us to have his life. He was also not a great person, to put it very mildly. And he lived a very, very hard life, but he was a genius. So if you want to read Tolstoy, Chekhov, Dostoevsky, indeed, and then there are great writers of the same rank, they're just not that well known like that. And like Turgenev and Goncharov and a whole host of them. They're just not that well known in the Western culture, just because Tolstoy and Chekhov and Dostoevsky occupy such humongous space. And then there were geniuses of the 20th century, residual. The sun was still shining, but already there was, of course, the most repressive regime in the world in place there. But they were poets of the rank of Mandelstam and Pasternak and Anna Akhmatova and others. Poets can exist in airless totalitarian space much better than fiction writers, because they work in shorter form and they have a firmer purchase on what they're doing. Fiction writers cannot survive a repressive regime, generally. If I were just to give you an advice, and I don't presume that it's my place, read those Russian writers that I suggested, and then your life you will see it somehow slightly, it will change for the better, as it has for so many other people.
So you wanted to come back again? Yes. Professor Ombongi, I just wanted to throw a kind of correction to my friend Tony. First of all, I want to appreciate both Professor and Tony for their responses. And also to just throw a caveat that I was not interested in ranking or asking them to rank themselves vis-a-vis their contemporaries or those who came before them. What I was looking at is the historicity of literature. For example, when we read Ngugi, there are certain contemporary writers who echo Ngugi's themes and style. When we read Tolstoy, there are modern writers who also echo Tolstoy and so on. So this is the context within which I was looking at the two presenters, whether, for example, they might have been influenced in their writings by either their contemporaries or those who came before them, or whether they took a different tangent. And this, as a scholar myself and a researcher, I learn a lot when I interact with great writers like yourselves. I learned the influences that gave birth to your works. This is why the university pays us. When we interact with you, we grow. So, Tony, I just wanted to correct the impression created that I am asking you to rank yourself vis-a-vis Ngugi or Meja Mwangi or somebody like that. I was just looking at, for example, the influences, how you capture history and how Ngugi captures history, whether there are any differences, because you read a lot. You've just given us an example of how you do a lot of research before you come up with the work. So that was the trajectory I had in mind when I raised my issue. Thank you very much for your responses, Professor and Tony.
Okay, so yeah, I'll be very brief. No, I don't go reading a whole bunch of writers. Like I said, whatever I'm going to write about usually, I try to keep like an original mind as possible. But this is where a bit of that legal training comes in. Stories for me are like cases. You have to make your case. You have to make your narrative case. You have to convince your reader. It has to be authentic. It has to have a great arc. It has to be believable. So whatever I'm doing, I'll just try. I want to go trying to look for crutches that, oh, who wrote about this? How did they write about it? Because you also have to have a bit of ability and faith within your own originality and your own command of language and your research methodology. So yes, I'll read what I consider relevant, but I'm no longer looking for style at my age, minimze. So yes, so what I'll just do is whatever topic it is, there's everything from Google to traveling to talking to, the likes of Ombongi, if need be, about historical things. Then you put your mind power there and you try to, this is where we all went to school. Yeah. Yeah. They say why cows were sold or goats or whatever. And then you apply it and you do it within your timeline and with some modicum of discipline and with the skills that are already inherent within you. Yes, as opposed to an academic type of trying to search who did what, how did they do it, what can I borrow or deviate from. I think that confuses a writer a lot. Thanks.
About what? I grew up within Russian literature and Russian culture. And I had favorite, and of course, we spent in 10th grade of high school whole years reading War and Peace, and most of us hated it. And but we read a lot. I was fortunate to grow up in a household where there were lots of books because my mother liked buying books, and she sometimes would spend whole night, literally 12 hours overnight, standing in line to a bookstore where in the morning the collected works would be subscribed to certain people according to the number. There was a limited number. So I spent my childhood reading books. We all were reading books because there was nothing on television. There was just one channel. We played soccer and we read books. That's all kind of we did growing up. And boys. And and when I started wanting to be a writer, and that happened somewhere when my literature teacher told me in 5th or 6th grade that I have talent, and I won first place competition somewhere by describing a postcard of some sorts. And I said, oh, this is wonderful. And so I told my parents, I have literary talent. And they said, okay, shut up. And but then, yeah, then I started writing quite a bit. And then I started winning literary competitions. And so I had the right of entering Leningrad University without entrance exams to philology department, literature department, but for a variety of reasons of political situation in the country, I couldn't do that eventually. So I went to technical college, and so I graduated with a degree, master's degree in engineering, electromagnetic engineering. So the writers that I loved, and they're not known here, although some people, writers know them in the United States, maybe like Vasily Aksionov. I emulated him, I adored him, because he was essentially parodying the Soviet propaganda language, the language of Soviet newspapers, the socialist realist language. And I found it very freeing, very liberating, and I loved it. And there were other writers like that. And then I became a writer myself, an underground writer, which to utter horror and despair on the part of my parents for obvious reasons, because that was a step that forever threw me out of the normal circle of Soviet life. I would never be. My father was a highly positioned scientist, and I was basically a dissident, traitor to the motherland. And so, but when I came to the United States of America and passed eventually through over the years, managed to pass through linguistic membrane and come out on the other side of it, then I found myself fairly isolated, I have to say, because my role models and favorite writers are American writers now. That's part of my culture. But I realized that I keep writing, my stories are set in Russia, primarily because the gravitational pull of Russia is enormous. Nabokov couldn't overcome it. I can't overcome it either, nor do I want to necessarily. So, yeah, you know, I feel that that I've lived two lives.
Yeah, let's have another round of applause for this great man. Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, 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 yeah. Thank you. And so with that, yeah, uh, we've just been so privileged. First, I've been privileged to have Mikhail here. I'm very grateful for the gentleman that I'll introduce, welcome to the lectern next to close this for us. And guys, girls, I call you that because you're vampires, eternally youthful. Yeah? Yeah, including the ones who have come from faraway places. Thank you so much for being here. Kindly, I'll volunteer that you register because I would be interested in us being still in touch with each other. With Gloria, just stand up. Yes, please, your phone number and your email address, kindly leave it with us so that we just stay in touch in these crosswords and worlds of literature, politics, and many other good things. So to our fantastic host, this man who has opened up these spaces, Doc, I'm very, very proud of what you've done within the university. We know how, it's not, again, Toeke is not a small thing. Yeah, to open up spaces like this and make them both interdisciplinary and open to the public and to the online. It's not, as Kenyans are fond of saying, we don't take it for granted. It's a cliche, but we don't take it for granted. And I really appreciate you very, very much. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony, for those many big words for a very small man like me. You know, now listening to both of you, I had something I described here as a cry of the oppressed, a cry for justice. I remember the book, I think is Mukangi, who wrote Kilio cha Haki. Is it Mukangi? How many of you have read Kilio cha Haki? It resonated very well with that as Prof bemoans the rise of right-wing politics across the world. And as you bemoan the diminishing of Nairobi as the romantic and the night capital of Africa, you know, this is a conversation that we want to continue to have with our goal of bringing history and archaeology from the ivory tower to where the people are. And these are the people, those listening online and those listening here in a live audience. And for us, the students of history, we begin to appreciate the multiple sources of the historical reality that we study. That's what I had for our MA and PhD students, and those of us who are involved in the study of historical methodology. you can see how literature can be a great source to the trade that we do, and that is historical discourse. And I want to believe that our colleagues from literature department and those of us from history and archaeology, we have appreciated the work that you have done. So I have stood here, Prof, to say thank you so much for agreeing to come and join us and for being part of this conversation. For our colleagues who joined us online from across the continents, we want to appreciate you. And for my colleagues here from the department, Malimungesa, thank you, Dr. Gwana, Ogutu, and our students, I can see Mark at the back, and Kemboi, and your friend Otieno, and the rest. And of course, above all, our friends from the diaspora. We can see my very good brother there from Memphis. Welcome home again. Nicholas, you are home already. I'm sure the jet lag is over now, not like you were last week. So welcome. This is the end of our presentations for this semester. This one was an extra. We wanted to accommodate Prof. Thank you very much for agreeing to be the very last this semester. We resume in mid-September with a new series that is going to culminate in our international conference in October, just at the eve of Mashujaa Day. We have an international conference coming up. We are sending out the advert just shortly for people to express interest. Please join us. So it will be done within the broader context of the series that we will have between September and December, so that we end the year. For all of you, our guests, I saw our former student Lydia. I think she's stepped out. And everybody else, our media crew, Delta Media, led by my very good brother, Isaiah Masese. Thank you very much for taking us to the world for the woodwork. This great team is from my local church here in Nairobi, Karangata SDA Church, and they are helping us to do a great job. And for the secretariat from the department, led by none other than our registrar Amos, thank you with your team for making all these logistics and making this possible this Nairobi afternoon. Thank you, and may God bless you all. And have a very good evening, a good afternoon, and a good morning, wherever you are. Thank you very much.